Welcome everyone to a world where the ordinary turns eerie and reality blurs into the realm of the unexplained. Prepare yourselves, for within these words lies a story that will send chills down your spine and linger in your nightmares. Dim the lights and get ready to be captivated by the unknown. My mom, my uncle, aunt, and cousins used to live in a house in Terre Haute, Indiana, which was dubbed the Red House. This house was my very first experience dealing with the paranormal, and certainly not the last. My uncle and his family moved into this house back in the early 1990s. It was a large two-story shingle-style house on a corner lot, painted red with a creepy basement. Most of it was unfinished with dirt floors, rock and stone walls, a detached garage, and secret rooms. Our first visit to my family's new house was for Christmas in 1991. We were going to drive up from Florida and spend the week of Christmas there. Before our visit, I remember speaking with my cousin, whom we'll call Lucas. He was the youngest child of 3 with 2 older sisters. Before going up there, he told me that I was going to see ghosts. I laughed it off and told him he was crazy because, at the time, I 100% did not believe ghosts were real. He said that he often saw numerous ghosts in this house, predominantly upstairs where his room was located. He said that only a few of the ghosts would ever step foot in his room, while the others would remain in the hallway and other areas of the house. Again, I laughed at his claims and told him I would believe it only if I see it. When we arrived, I was surprised by how large this house was. It was easily the largest house that I'd ever stayed in, and all I could think about was playing hide and seek or manhunt inside the house with my cousins. I was staying with Lucas in his room, as he had bunk beds. My parents stayed downstairs in the spare bedroom. As I walked upstairs to my cousin's room, I remember being in awe of how long this hallway was, even though there were only 3 doors in that long hallway. The first door on the left was the bathroom. The next door on the right was my cousin's sister's room, whom we'll call Julie and Noemi. And the final door at the very end of the hallway was Lucas's room. His room was massive. It looked like a mini ballroom. As you walked in, straight ahead was his bunk bed and a large window behind it. He had his TV and video game system set up to the right, and numerous toys and Hot Wheel tracks to the left. There was also a small crawl space door along the left side wall. The first night, my cousin kept telling me everything he had seen in this room and throughout the house. It did spook me out, but I was still very skeptical of the story. One thing that I did notice was that Lucas had very dark circles under his eyes. He said it was because he couldn't sleep very well in that house and would often stay up most nights, trying to sleep. On that first night, I listened to his stories, and we went to sleep. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred, but that would change the very next day. On my second day at the house, after coming in from playing outside, Lucas and I went upstairs to watch a movie and play with some toys. We set up a whole tent in the middle of the room and pretended it was a stadium as we played with his wrestling figures. We had set up some spy tech toys around the room, including a motion sensor that you would set at the door, and if it opened, it would beep. We set it up because my cousin Julie would often barge in or mess with our toy setup. So that toy would alert us if she entered the room. Shortly after we were playing with the action figures in the tent started shaking lightly. I noticed it at first, but it wasn't too alarming. Not more than a minute later, it started shaking rapidly. I automatically assumed it was Julie and looked out the door, but I couldn't see her. By the time I stuck my head back in, the shaking stopped. Lucas was frozen, still looking out the unzipped window of the tent. Seconds later, it started shaking again. I jumped out of the tent and witnessed it shake for a quick second before it stopped. I blamed Lucas for somehow doing this and trying to scare me, and then thought it could have been Julie. But as we opened his bedroom door, the spy tech toy sensor sounded off. That proved that no one else other than Lucas and myself were in that room. Julie was lying on her bed watching television. Even though that scared me, I still wasn't convinced that a ghost could have done that. I told my parents about it at dinner, and they kind of laughed it off. My uncle chimed in and said, "Did Lucas' imagination get to you as well?" Lucas had told his parents about the various experiences he had had in this house, but they didn't entertain the possibility of it being a ghost. They said it was all in his imagination. That night, I slept on the bottom bunk, and Lucas slept on the top. The events that night will never leave my memory. As I started dozing off, Lucas reached around the backside of the bunk and got my attention. He told me to look down the hall. The bunk bed was perfectly positioned where, depending on which side you slept on, you could look right down the long upstairs hallway. I was laying, all I had to do was turn my head, and I could get that vantage point. As I looked down the hall, I saw a very slender and tall man. He had on a long coat. I could distinctly make out his face, and he appeared to be covered in soot, like a dusty powder. He was walking very slowly towards our room, but I could not see anything under his knees. It was like his legs stopped right at the knee. It paralyzed me in fear. He disappeared before getting to the room, which was only a few seconds, even though it felt like an eternity. I was so frightened that I couldn't move. I just turned my head and buried it into my pillow. I recall shaking from fear. A few minutes later, I was overcome by an ice-cold sensation coming from the side of my body, facing the door. I slowly turned around and saw a woman, clear as day. She had tattered clothing and was holding a cat. She was literally inches from me. She also had a musky smell like stale perfume, but it was very faint. This may sound cheesy, but she resembled the Fratelli mom from the Goonies in terms of body type. I didn't see her face. I couldn't even scream for my parents. I again turned around and got deep under my sheets with a pillow over my head. As soon as I woke up, I ran down the stairs and told my mother. This time, my mom didn't shrug it off like before. Instead, she said, "Everything will be fine, and some things can't be explained." A few days later was Christmas, and after we opened our presents, we went outside to ride bikes and rollerblade. My mom went upstairs to take a shower. She was alone in the house. As she was in the shower, she heard the door open and footsteps getting closer to the shower. She assumed it was my stepdad, but it couldn't have been as he was outside with us. She spoke out to him but didn't receive a response. As she pulled back the shower curtain, she noticed the open door and was quickly hit in the face with a cold burst of air and knocked back a few steps, but she didn't fall. Her talon closed, then fell off the bathroom counter and toppled to the ground. After taking a shower, she walked outside and asked my stepdad if he had entered the bathroom at any time, to which he responded he didn't. She told me this years after this visit when I was in my late teens. She also told me that the house had creeped her out after our first night there. She felt like she was being watched and also felt a breath on her neck while walking alone down the hallway. We left a few days after Christmas. I felt so terrible that Lucas had to continue living in the house and be tormented like he was. It wasn't soon after that activity picked up, and my uncle and aunt started having their own experiences, which ultimately led them to selling the house and moving a few blocks away. I would also like to share some of the paranormal events that they encountered. These are the experiences they had, and they're not in any particular order, just accounts that I recalled them telling me. They had an old German shepherd named Yankee, who had bad hip problems and was an indoor-outdoor dog. He loved staying in their detached garage and would hide in there during storms. One night, something spooked him so bad that he jumped out the small window located in the garage, which was almost 6 feet off the ground. Another time, they found him pawing at the back door, and then once when they went on vacation, they found their huge 500-gallon fish tank busted open with all the fish dead. This tank had very thick glass, and there were no signs of anything falling and busting it open. My youngest cousin, Julie, was at the top of the stairs, and Nomi was at the bottom. They were playing with a slinky when all of a sudden, Nomi said it appeared like Julie was pushed from behind as her body slingshot forward, and she fell down the stairs, breaking her clavicle. She didn't see anyone push her, just described what it looked like. Before they moved out of the house, they decided to further explore the crawl space in Lucas's room. They thought the crawl space didn't lead anywhere, but that was not the case. The crawl space contained bags of rat poison that appeared to be stored in there for a long period of time. After removing all of the bags, they noticed the little room was, in fact, a crawl space. They crawled in there and wiggled through the tight space for about 8 feet until they found a hidden room at the end of the crawl space. My uncle said the room appeared like a time capsule. It had inches of dust on everything and many cobwebs. The air was stagnant, and there was an old desk, boxes of old worn shoes, and newspapers from the 1930s and 40s littered throughout the room. They were surprised that they had lived in this house for a few years and never even knew this room existed. Their landlord never mentioned it, and was surprised himself when they mentioned they found it. The house was dubbed the Red House because it was painted red. The first year that my family lived in the house, their landlord had hired painters to paint the exterior of the house yellow. Within a few months, the red bled right through the exterior. Supposedly, that wasn't the first time someone attempted to paint the house a different color, but after each attempt, the pale red color would return. The final straw, which caused my family to break their lease and move out early, was on the night of Lucas's first Little League baseball game of the season. Lucas and my uncle were already at the ball fields, and my aunt got Julie and Noemi in the car, which was parked in the detached garage directly behind the house. The driveway of the garage faced the side street, and my aunt went around the house and turned off all the lights in the house except for a lamp in the living room, the kitchen light, and the exterior lights. It was already dusk by this time. As they pulled out of the garage driveway and drove around to the front side of the house, my aunt looked up at the house and noticed every single light in the house. Every room window was turned on. It stopped her in her tracks. As she continued to stare at the house, she noticed the curtains in Lucas's room open and the dark shadow silhouette of a person in the window. My aunt drove to the ball fields that night and told my uncle that it was time to move. A short time later, they did. Numerous neighbors knew that the house was haunted and would often tell my uncle. The kids at school also knew about the house's history, and Lucas's experiences were widely known. One of the neighbors told my uncle that numerous people died in the house, ranging from murders to suicides, and the house had been inhabited throughout its history by some very shady and malevolent people. The same neighbor told my uncle that there were at least 5 spirits in that house, some being evil or demonic. My family never took the time to confirm any of those stories. Once they moved, they wanted nothing else to do with that house. The curtain falls on another nightmarish tale, but nightmares have a way of returning. Sleep well, if you dare.